my name is Sara, and I have decided to talk about the Amarna system, which was one of the first signs of diplomacy. So I would just like to emphasize that I'm not an expert on the topic, but merely a student with a great deal of interest about the topic. So it's just informative. And so if you think that I've made a mistake, please correct me or ask any questions. And I'm not trying to persuade you of my agenda or convince you of anything else. So the outline of this presentation goes as such. So the first is the context of the Amarna period and the growing civilizations. And then the second is the characteristics of the system. And lastly, how it has kind of impacted today's diplomacy and yeah. So I chose this topic because I stumbled across a course called War and Diplomacy in the Ancient World as I was searching for summer courses at different colleges, and I read the description and I was extremely interested and I couldn't wait to start. So I just researched and I came across this topic and I wanted to share it with other people. So what was the Amarna period like? So ancient Egypt in the 13th century BCE, Egypt during this time shifted in its religious and political system by Pharaoh Akhenaten, claiming that the religion should be monotheistically structured and not polytheistic. And he claimed that Aten was the primary god. And so this changed the values and arts of the Egyptian state. And not only was were the arts developed, but the king established a new capital city called the Horizon of the Aten, encouraging reforms and thus political strategies as well. So other civilizations during the Amarna period. So it began in the 14th century BCE, where the religions, many kingdoms began to develop. Kingdoms grew as city-states with self-governing bodies. At the same time, through expansion and some signs of contact between kingships, the rising powers became apparent. So here in this map, you can see the Haranians, who created the state of Mitanni, dominated North Mesopotamia, and the Kassites in the south controlled most of Babylonia, and the Assyrians expanded their control in most of Syria. So diplomacy before was very different, and while they still did have some forms of diplomacy, and most notably dating back to the relations between the neighboring kingdoms of Ebla and Mari in Syria, there wasn't really a true set of international languages, and there weren't many set in stone structures of how to conduct diplomatic structure practices. Instead, letters of communication before were much more secretive and less formal, and it was known more as like a brotherhood of the kings. So it was based on relations and not specific structures. So what is the Amarna system? So the Amarna system dated back to the 13th century BCE. In 1887, 382 tablets were found, and they discovered that the letters can be divided into two subdivisions. The first concerns foreign powers that dealt with Egypt, more or less based on equality. In Mesopotamian orders, those who truly seek to form alliances were when kings emphasized the idea of brotherhood and mutual agreements. However, there was also those that dealt with kingdoms from Syria and southern Palestine, whom were Egyptian vassals. So they were all written in cuneiform structure, which is just recently became widely seen as an international language of a cosmopolitan culture. Oh, and the second subdivision was more administrative ones. So those were within the Egyptian Empire. And those were also written as correspondences, inventories, orders to manage subordinate vassals, and other foreign correspondences for peace treaties, trade agreements, and most important, marriage agreements, because that was how they emphasized alliances. So these two are examples of these Amarna letters, and these are one of the 382 tablets found. So most of the letters found were in, all of them were in cuneiform, but most of them were in the Akkadian language, which determined the lingua franca of the region. The first one on the left was written by the king of Assyria, where he offers gifts to the king of Egypt, with the goal of creating an open relationship of communication with the powers of the region, with the power of the region. The next one was between the city of Tyre and between the king and the vassal ruler who expected protection for his loyalty to the Egyptian Empire. So how did the system set the stage for diplomacy? So the system allowed for the first peace treaty in the world. The treaty, seen here in this image, ended the conflict between the Egyptians and the Hittites. The two kings understood that neither one of them could gain advantage of the other, and the best course was the path of peace. And so they formed this treaty with the help of the Amarna system that allowed for easy and streamlined communication. And through peace, it allowed for a new kingdom to rise. So its significance. The Amarna system allowed for more relationships between large kingdoms and the great powers. So because of these formed alliances, neither kingdoms were required to put so much energy into warfare and conflict, instead could promote trade and economic activity between faraway kingdoms, and which allowed for these city-states to develop much more streamlined and rapidly. The system continued to be used for approximately 100 years after the period, and set the way for more complex forms of diplomacy that we know today. Thank you. If you'd like to learn more about the topic, I have provided you with the sources that were used, and yeah, thank you.